Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. Today I'm going to talk about Marsilio Ficino's 3 books on life. And this was prompted by somebody emailing me and saying, hey, did you see that there's now a paperback copy of the Cask and Clark translation of Ficino's 3 books on life? And I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I wanted to encourage people to get a copy, but I did realize that I really should give some background on first on 3 books on life, and then even more background on Ficino. So there's a link then to the copy of 3 books on life, but I'm going to go into some detail about Marsilio Ficino and then why this book is so important and why you need to immediately get a copy of it. So Marsilio Ficino. You may have heard of him, 15th century priest and philosopher. He lived in Florence. He was Cosimo de' Medici, who was the ruler of Florence, was his patron. Ficino translated Plato, a lot of Neoplatonists. The Corpus Hermeticum is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. He was the founder of the Platonic Academy in Florence. This is not like a university or something, but really more of an informal association of like-minded people. Discussion, writing, lots of discussion of philosophy, arts, things like that. One of the things that's really, I think, interesting about Ficino is that unusually among, esoteric authorities in the Renaissance and, astrological magicians, etc., he managed not to get into these massive feuds. I mean, Giordano Bruno just could not cross the street apparently without getting into argument with people everywhere he went. He ended up in arguments, and he ended up getting himself burned by the Inquisition. And not as a hero for science as he's portrayed nowadays, but as a heretic. Even Cornelius Agrippa had trouble getting along with people. I mean, he kind of was moving around a lot, never could get a patron, never was really as successful as he wanted to be. Was kind of frustrated. Ficino, it's interesting, and it comes through in his writing as well. He has an incredibly beautiful writing style, very uplifting, and he was able to, despite his advocacy of astrological magic, was able to not get in trouble with the Inquisition and, really get along with people. And like I said, it was a really key influence in the Renaissance. I mean, he's right in the center of it in Florence in the 15th century when it's at its height, and he influenced a lot of scholars, particularly in the humanism, which is sort of this revival of ancient learning, also artists, painters, sculptors. So he was incredibly important. And so I think one of the most important things to recognize about Ficino, and this is really true of most philosophers before the modern era, is that they're not like a modern professor of philosophy. The modern professor of philosophy is studying the subject. It's sort of a bug on a pin kind of situation. It's dead, and you're gonna, kind of rip whatever knowledge out of it that you can. The modern, and it's even worse with philosophy, because essentially the modern philosophy professor takes it as a sort of like a video game, or some kind of algorithm, and we're going to kind of take it apart and we're going to figure out the rules. But of course, it's not real. It's fake. So not only is it something that's dead, that doesn't have anything to do with us, but it's not even true. And we know what reality is. Reality is atheistic materialism, which is that nothing really exists except matter and energy. So all the spirit and everything like that, it's interesting, but it's a cultural artifact. It's fake. Now, Ficino did not have this understanding at all. For him, philosophy was a way of understanding reality. He felt like he was part of this ancient tradition. He was part of the chain of transmission, and his ultimate focus was spiritual. However, this is a study of the spirit and practice of spirit that is logical, that you can point to and you can understand in a rational way, as long as you don't take rational as being atheistic materialist. Ultimately, as far as Ficino was concerned, the purpose of philosophy was to understand reality and to lead to the divine. So definitely a spiritual quest, and not simply just sort of a mind game. So let's talk a little bit about 3 books on life. As I said, Ficino did lots of translation. He wrote original works, Platonic theology, for example. translated the Corpus Hermetica, made the philosophical works attributed to Hermes Trismegistus widely available to the medieval audience, if long as you could read Latin. And Three Books on Life is an original work. And essentially, it's interesting because Ficino was originally trained as a physician before he became a priest. So it has almost a medical focus. But of course, the Renaissance medicine also included the spiritual. So if we look at the traditional Galenic medicine, very much focused on the four humors. And the focus of the medicine would be to balance humors, to have a balanced physiology and mind as well, mind and spirit. It's interesting, throughout Three Books on Life, Ficino has an incredible focus on melancholy and also on Saturn. Now, traditionally, melancholy is felt to be negative. Depression, isolation, things like that are associated with melancholy. And to this day, we have someone's melancholy, they're sad, they're depressed. But Ficino says, quote, that melancholy carries the investigator to the highest subjects. This is in Book 1, Chapter 6. And so melancholy, the melancholy humor or melancholy planets like Saturn and Mercury, but in particular Saturn, bring wisdom, also associated with occult philosophy, esoteric knowledge, and prophecy. And one of the interesting things, again, the best translation really is Cask and Clark. It's interesting, and you can see their sort of lack of understanding of traditional astrology. Cask and Clark, and they talk about Ficino's horoscope, are mystified that Ficino didn't focus on his sun sign, because obviously everybody knows that sun signs are the whole basis of astrology. Well, modern astrology, true, but not medieval Renaissance astrology. Interestingly enough, Ficino's horoscope has Saturn rising in Aquarius. And he says, Saturn seems to impress the seal of melancholy me from the beginning, as set as he is in the midst of my ascendant, Aquarius. So again, a lot of the focus in the book is on melancholy. And one of the departures that Ficino makes is that exalting melancholy and seeing the real positive parts of it and how useful it is. I like this, but I'm biased because I also have Saturn rising in Aquarius in my chart. So I feel, a real connection to Ficino coming from that. Now, the first book of Three Books on Life is very focused on, as I said, on the humors. The melancholy humor, cold and dry, represent in the body, black bile. Sanguine temperament, hot and wet, blood. Phlegmatic temperament, cold and wet, phlegm. And then the choleric temperament, hot and dry, and yellow bile. And this is the basis of Galenic medicine, traditional Western medicine. It's interesting. There's a big focus on traditional Chinese medicine, and we've almost completely forgotten our own traditional Western medicine. We've tossed it, great gifts that we sort of tossed aside. Modern, what's often known as allopathic medicine, which is the sort of medicine nowadays, says it's the only type of medicine. Everything else doesn't work. And its focus is basically on finding symptoms and then treating the symptoms. And again, the traditional Western medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine, other traditional medicine, is focused on balance. And the balance there is balancing the humors, which again are associated with the elements. So as in cold and dry, melancholy is associated with the earth element. Air, earth, fire, and water. So it's this unity of thought that goes throughout the medicine, as well as the philosophy and magic of the traditional Western knowledge. So it's interesting, Ficino in Three Books on Life, he, as much as he's into melancholy, he also says, you need to watch out for it, need to watch out for that black bile, that melancholic humor. He says you need to avoid foods that have a strong, melancholic basis. We should be thick and heavy wine, food that's hard, dry, salty, bitter, sharp, stale, roasted, or fried. It's interesting. It's like it's sort of there's the taste. There's one called umami, which is a very savory taste. Those things all seem to have, or processed foods that seem to go along with it. So it's interesting that that's associated with melancholy. Ficino also says you want to make sure your body's not excessively dry or cold, again, to avoid that melancholy humor. So he says to balance the excessive black bile and melancholy, you want to balance it with cinnamon, saffron, cucumbers, sweet apples, pears, and figs, with pleasant smells, temperate cool air, He says, and views of shining water, gardens, groves, and pleasant walks. He also says, the best is variety, easy occupations, diversified, unburdened business, and the constant company of agreeable people. That's from Book 1, Chapter 10. So I really get a sense of sort of like, this really reminds me of sort of modern New Age stuff. I mean, I'm not down on that. It's like, because you have this combination of of foods, but also it's more than foods. You've got smells, you've got views, you've got this whole psychological, this whole total environment that really is supportive of balance and is balancing this negativity in a lot of ways. So I like that in a lot of ways. It's not just focused on material things. There's also the psychological and spiritual that comes with it, and these all are unified together. And the whole point is to seek balance, and it's a really interesting system to work with. And so something that would be, I think, is going to happen is we're going to see this revival and understanding of our own traditional Western medicine, not as a substitute for allopathic medicine, but as a supplement to it, because there's many things that modern medicine doesn't deal with very well. It's great for you sprain your arm, or I just had cataract surgery that just worked amazingly for me. But there's lots of problems that modern medicine just doesn't deal very well with, and psychology is particularly an area like that. The dosing people with drugs also just doesn't seem to have a good long-term effect. I mean, it can be helpful in the short term and helpful in certain situations, but certainly not a complete solution to things. So it'd be nice to have some more arrows in our quiver and other things to deal with it. And Ficino gives us a glimpse into that world and gives us some very actually useful practical advice for dealing with it. So Book 1 is full of all sorts of useful advice about the humors and balancing the humors in a very moderate and I think in a pleasant way. Like I said, views of shining water, gardens and groves, and pleasant walks sounds like a really nice way to treat your melancholy problems. So Book 2 is on having a long life. So again, a lot of Book 2 is on balance. You don't want to be too dry or too cold, temperate drinking and eating. And Ficino gives a lot of advice for the diet and activities of the elderly people to help them have a longer life. So I think that's very useful, interesting to take a look at. But really the focus for astrological magicians is Book 3. And this is entitled On Obtaining Life from the Heavens. And this really is a key text for astrological magic. Anyone that's interested in astrological magic really should get a copy of this and read it. What's, I think, extremely useful in this is this very detailed explanation of spiritual causality. Of course, like any traditional philosopher, Ficino starts with the divine, and all things are unified in the divine. Then the Platonic ideas, they're separate, but they're perfect, arise as thoughts in the divine mind. And then these same Platonic ideas manifest as the root reasons of things in the anima mundi, the soul of the world, which then express themselves through the stars and the planets into material things. It's interesting because we've got this definite sense of unity. We got this definite understanding of the how planetary rulership comes apart, and then what can be, and then talismans are just one of the things that can be done with planetary rulership or with fixed stars as well, with any celestial factor. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about it is Ficino says, let no man wonder that soul, this is the world soul, can be allured, as it were, by material forms, since she herself has created baits of this kind suitable to herself to be allured by thereby. This is Book 3, Chapter 1. So what he's talking about here is, the standard Solomonic grimoire is, and I think the typical approach that people take is binding spirits. We're going to grab them, so to speak. We're going to force them. We're going to put them into something. We're going to make them do what we want. We're going to exert our power over them. That's a very typical approach, and there's nothing wrong with that approach. But Ficino's giving us another one. He's saying you can create things in such a way that the celestial spirits are happy to be there, that the anima mundi wants to take up residence in it, that it's associated with it, it's properly made, it's made out of the right materials, but even more importantly, the right forms, and that's the way to do it. And this is really very much of a devotional approach. So he's not specifically giving it that name. This is really what we're dealing with in a lot of ways. The devotional approach is that not forcing the spirits to do what we want, but working with them in a respectful way, And in this way, like I said, he's creating a pleasant environment for them, and something that they're happy to be there. And also the timing comes along with that. This is another one of the reasons for doing timing. It's respectful and appropriate to do that with astrological magic. Now, Ficino would of course not be able to sign on to invocations of spirits, because that's just going to get yourself in trouble with the Inquisition. So he's careful in 3 Books on Life to sort of disown that. At the same time, it's very clear he's using Picatrix as an authority, and he's getting very close to the line in terms of the talismans that he's talking about, because he's a rat out of Picatrix, which of course is using invocations. So in terms of this devotional practice of creating things that are appropriate to the spirits and the anima mundi, Ficino emphasizes the figures, forms, but also relationships and proportions, mathematics, as being even more powerful than materials. So this is a method of getting in contact with the Platonic ideas that are mediated through the celestials and scattered throughout material things. So in 3 Books on Life, Ficino gives us this incredible overview and understanding of the causality in a very spiritual way, and in a very positive way too, not in any binding or something like that, or dealing with devils or demons or evil spirits. He is actually taking a natural magic approach officially. I think he's also basically sort of quietly giving his nod to a devotional approach as well. Ficino in 3 Books on Life, though, gives an incredible detail about all sorts of astrological influences, lots of information on planetary and fixed star rulerships. He goes on and on about the different things ruled by each planet and what you can do with them in terms of, like I said, diet, health, medicine, and then also an incredible amount of information about talismans, on the history, the theory, and the creation of many different types of talismans. We've got planetary talismans, fixed stars, mansions of the moon, decans. It's like an incredible mix of things. He's even got some unique stuff. He has an explanation of making a figure of the world, which is sort of chart-based, but it's essentially unified, talismanic talisman of the cosmos that you would set up. It sounds like it's like almost like a like an armillary sphere or something like that, that's got the different planetary orbits in it or things like that, and you'd make it at a particular astrologically appropriate time, and then set it up and contemplate it for philosophical insight, but also for union with the divine. So really very interesting, again, a devotional spiritual use of astrological magic principles. So very important text, lots of useful information in it, for practical information for an astrological talismans, tons of background information about how it actually works. Great way to orient yourself with traditional astrological magic, particularly if you're interested in a spiritual approach. Ficino and it's beautiful to read. It's really enjoyable, well written, and Ficino ties things together and ties it together with Hermeticism and Neoplatonic thought as well. So this is an incredibly important text. It was published. There was a translation, non-academic translation, and then this is the hardcover, the Cask and Clark translation, done by the Medieval and Renaissance Text Society. So the Medieval and Renaissance Text Society tends to publish pretty obscure academic stuff that nobody is interested in except academics. 3 Books on Life was an exception. They would keep bringing out printings of it, and it would just sell out, and they would go out of print for a while, and they would keep bringing out more copies of it. I've seen the hardcover on Amazon for like $500 when it was out of print. It's always very difficult to get in touch with, to find. It's something that is really important for my course. I do have a little chunk of it in the course in PDF, but I think it's really, really useful to have as a text, and I really recommend that everybody get a copy. If anyone is interested in astrological magic, should have a copy of 3 Books on Life. Now, like I said, it's now available, this is the hardcover, but it's now available in paperback. There's a link here on the YouTube page. If you buy through that link, I really appreciate it. It's got an associate link. It doesn't cost you anything more, but I do get a little bit of an associate cut for that. It helps keep the lights on at Renaissance Astrology, which I greatly appreciate. Help yourself by getting a copy. Help Renaissance Astrology keep going. But like I said, very important book, And I think that, hopefully they're going to keep it in print, but, the typical medieval Renaissance and Tech Society thing is to sell out. So I would go ahead and quickly get a copy of this. It's a much more reasonable price than the hardcover, and a really excellent translation. Now, Cask and Clark, again, being academics, like I said, they make some problems with the technical astrology. They, at one point, confuse the via combustion and combustion. But otherwise, an excellent translation, very useful, and something you definitely want to get yourself a copy of. So go out and get that paperback of 3 Books on Life, and dive into Ficino, who's one of our most important and one of my favorite Renaissance authors and astrological text sources.